I got fan mail from a supporter on Patreon. This young man writes in and says, I think I should tell you a little bit about myself. I am 19 years old and I'm from Belgium. I've been vegan for 3 years now, living in a family that completely rejects this idea. I actually found your channel about a year ago through a teacher I had in high school who was also vegan. But I never really watched your videos until about 2 weeks ago. So somewhere in Belgium, there's a high school teacher who took aside one of his or her students and said, oh, I understand you're vegan. I understand you have conflicts with your family. You should watch this crazy Canadian guy. Maybe he'll help improve your English vocabulary. I don't know what the agenda was. So it's nice to imagine on the other side of the world, a teacher and student commiserating and sharing the link to my channel. That's cool. We were in Belgium about a year ago, some year and a half, whatever it's been now. Belgium is not such a strange place to us. I have had fans tell me face to face and in email and by Skype and stuff that watching my channel improved their ability in the English language. And some of those viewers, English was their first language. But they told me use a lot of vocabulary they'd never heard before. They didn't learn in school. Okay. I continue, quote, I really connected with your opinion on different topics and your approach to them. But what really got me interested is when I heard about your humanitarian work and your work on languages. Right now I'm thinking about what direction I want my life to take. And I was hoping you could tell me a bit about how you decided on what you wanted to do with your life and how you ended up doing humanitarian work, etc. Okay. So I'll finish reading the letter in a minute, but this is obviously the big question. It's true I've done humanitarian work, but I am not the kind of person who goes around telling other people that they should repeat my mistakes in life. It's true that I've spent a lot of time learning a lot of languages, and I don't encourage others to repeat my mistakes in life. How did I end up with such a focus on humanitarian work? It was primarily through rejecting the approach to political reality presented to me by my parents. My parents were communists. They were real, sincere, no-joke communists, and they were very directly disciples of Karl Marx, and Karl Marx teaches that all social progress occurs through violence. Now, yeah, that's the one clause, one sentence version of Karl Marx's theory of social change. It's true, Karl Marx also talks about economic systems of production, changes in technology, changes in the organization of labor, but what it boils down to is, for true believing communists, the only type of social change they can participate in is violence. And from a very early age, there was this conflict between me and my parents because I was always asking about humanitarian work. Like, from my perspective, okay, you guys claim you care about the poor, but you don't actually care about the poor. You basically just propound the notion that one day you're going to have this incredibly violent revolution in the name of the poor, and then in theory, like the Soviet Union and like China, things will be quote-unquote better for the poor, which is, again, even then, it was debatable. Back in the 1980s, it was really debatable whether the poor were better off in Western democracies or in communist dictatorships. Okay, but all that aside, it's like, well, gee, mom, gee, dad, there were other kids at my school and their parents actually do some kind of charity work. Like they actually give bowls of soup to homeless people, or they do fundraisers. They're involved in some kind of charity humanitarian outreach. And I noticed that you and your kind of self-selected clan of political extremists, you all have nothing to do with that. You reject all those ideas. And your idea of political activism is, on the one hand, a commitment to extreme violence. And let's be clear, both of my parents, I can remember my mother directly saying that she approved of the government of China massacring people in Tibet and exterminating Buddhism. I can remember my father directly saying that he approved of Joseph Stalin killing millions of people for for reasons that are actually much more difficult to summarize. Joseph, sometimes Stalin killed people just because. It's very hard to, many of his purges, it's very hard to ascribe a rational motive to. They really approved of mass murder, not just, say, during the French Revolution, not just in a slave revolt or rebellion. They really bought into the violence of the ideology. And then on the other hand, like a lot of leftists, there were these strange ideas that really valorized the arts. So you see that. You see that even with people like ContraPoints, even with kind of current generation of watered-down, wishy-washy socialists. What is it you think is so special about the arts? And now on YouTube, it's like, what is it you think is special about doing like art criticism? Like, why is it? Slavoj Žižek, he has hours and hours discussing the Batman films here on YouTube. Yeah, left-wing cultural criticism of Batman films. And I'm not against it, but you can see when the left-wingers do it, when communists do it, they think there's some greater significance to that. So I had a friend back in Canada years and years ago, and his parents were fundamentalist Christians. In brief, they were sincere, serious Christians, and they did humanitarian work. And I said to him many times, I said, if I had been born in your family, I would have found it much more difficult to challenge my parents' beliefs just because of the humanitarian work. Like, even though everything else about Christianity may be bullshit, everything else may be false. Oh, you guys are part of an ideology where you actually help people, where you actually feed the poor or give clothes to the needy, or they went to Africa. They help people in his particular family. Now, of course, I think it'd be inevitable that I'd reject the Bible and so on, but that probably would have had a much bigger grip on me. So the point is this. In my case, I stumbled into humanitarian work via negativa. It was through the negation of the other paths presented to me. At a young age, I was involved with the theater, with acting and playwriting. And I don't know if I've ever really done a video talking about how that affected my life, but it did in a lot of ways. And it affected the way I perceive myself and the way I perceive relationships with women, shallow issues that haunt people for a lot of their lives, issues of beauty and appearance and stuff. And, and it changed the way I viewed Canadian society. A lot of things like that came out of my early involvement in the theater. But when you look at that and you say, okay, this is not for me. When I looked at other arts, like painting, okay, I'm interested in like the most political 1% of painting, but most of this stuff, the pursuit of the aesthetic or something is of absolutely no interest to me. So negating these things, then negating the kind of path of violent revolution, one of the main things left was, hey, humanitarian work. Now, of course, partly I chose humanitarian work for the wrong reasons. That's what I'm emphasizing here. And partly I did so out of ignorance, and I did so to my own destruction, so to speak. However, what I was correct about, or what I was not wrong about, was that I looked at humanitarian work also as a kind of educational experience. I've quoted this before. There is an old nihilist slogan, Russian nihilism. Go to the poor, be the poor. Go to the people, be the people. The idea that, if you go to do humanitarian work in Cambodia or Laos, you're not going there to teach them. You're not going there to teach them how to farm rice. You're going there to learn. You're going there to learn how they live, how they survive, whether you're talking about people who literally survive in the jungle, which we still had, or people who survive as rice farmers, whatever that is. You're there to kind of learn from that culture. And I did not think of that as anthropology. And I was very, so it's a kind of traditionalism. It's a kind of inter-traditionalism, saying, okay, I can go and do humanitarian work. I can make life better in some way, providing something. And then in return, I can kind of be a student of everything that's right and everything that's wrong with this culture. Because believe me, I'm not glorifying it. Nobody does. When was the last time you heard someone glorifying Cambodian culture? It's a brutal, terrible, awful culture in so many ways. But nevertheless, the point is you go there not to preach and not to teach, but you go to learn. And that I was right about. And in that sense, maybe in that sense alone, I still recommend humanitarian work. So this person writing in is 19. You've got a lot to learn, and you could learn a lot from humanitarian work. The problem is humanitarian work is a rich man's game. If you are not a donor, if you are not a fundraiser, what are you doing? The economic reality of humanitarian work, even for someone who's a medical doctor or a dentist, you might think, oh, it's easy for them. They have the credentials. No, it's not. Humanitarian work is easy for Bill Gates. It's easy for multimillionaires. It's easy for incredibly wealthy people. And for everyone else, it's a very dark, very dishonest field. And it's a bit of a running gag in the mainstream press and journalism. Every couple of years, people do an article specifically about quitting the humanitarian nonprofit sector and going over to the business world and interviewing people who've done that. And they all say, oh, wow, things are so much more honest and upstanding here in the for-profit sector. And I know why. I know why. When you're on the inside figuring it out, you can figure out why. This is not to say that, everyone in business is honest and upstanding, but that, as I say, it's almost a running joke in Western culture. And, it's worth examining. It's worth understanding. But it's a little bit like asking, why does the Catholic Church have such a bad track record, in terms of everything, rape and impregnating students and, cultural genocide. We should mention, all these terrible things. If you kind of make a flow chart and say, okay, well, what is the Catholic Church doing with this humanitarian project? Then why does it turn out so badly? I would just say other charity organizations have more in common with the Catholic Church than you might like to assume, including even left-wing and secular and communist organizations. So, the question was how you decided on what you wanted to do with your life and how you ended up doing humanitarian work. So briefly, Melissa's heard me say this before, just in the last week. When I was at the University of Toronto, I met professors of Asian studies who'd never been to Asia. I met white men who had devoted decades of their life to working on language, history, politics, culture of different countries in Asia, and never got in an airplane and went there, never got in a boat. It wasn't just at the University of Toronto. As time went on, I met other professors who had lived in a totally white Western bubble and had no real experience in these places. So when they talk about Cambodia, they're talking about a word on a piece of paper. They're talking about a series of lines. And they're lines written in English, too. They don't learn the local language. And their knowledge of local language would still just be words on a paper. They don't have a sense of the people and their struggle and their culture and the contradictions and the brutality and everything else. They don't know what it's like to struggle to get a good night's sleep because of the dogs barking outside your window and the mosquitoes buzzing outside your mosquito net, all the other things that are packaged into that experience of really living out on those frontiers. And they may know what it's like to read an ancient Pali or ancient Sanskrit text, that's been photocopied or reproduced from a book, a copy of a copy of a copy, but they maybe don't know what it's like to be out in that jungle and see it etched onto a piece of stone. And then to not just see the history, because you're not seeing the historical context, to see the reality of the village surrounding it today, what society and political situation is today surrounding that piece of stone. So you get a sense of, okay, this is what things were like 500 years ago, and this is what things are like today. Sometimes those ancient stone today could be in a parking lot full of jeepneys and motorcycles and stuff, whatever, just saying. Reality of living out there can be educational in all those ways too. The shock of contrasting the ancient and the modern. So I met those professors who'd spent their whole lives with a chalkboard in a white Western setting, and I decided that's not for me. I've got to live like a young man when I'm young. Most of these professors, they were over 60. It was clear they never did it. They're never going to do it. So I said, okay, so while I'm in my 20s, I got to go out and risk stepping on a landmine. I got to have this combination of humanitarian. I got to do it now. And I made that decision. And in some ways, I'm left with regrets that will haunt me for the rest of my life. But whenever I talk to and interact with those guys, the guys who stayed in Western academia, whether Canadian academia, British academia, French academia, whenever I talk to any of them, I think all of them envy me. And this is not psychology on my part. This is not like an analysis. I mean, like, they have sent me emails saying, wow, I really envy you. Or, even if they don't think of it at first, they sit down with me and start talking to me, and they mention some stone inscription. It's like, oh, yeah, I've been there and I've seen it. They mentioned some, Buddhist temple in Isan. It's like, oh no, I've been there and talked to the monks, where I'd really had those experiences, whether to do with wealth and poverty, whether to do with farming. You might be talking about the reality of agriculture and the economy, or whether to do with Buddhism and ancient history and languages. And oh no, that's not what that dialect sounds like. In the Northeast, they say it this way, and I know because I've been there. Whenever I've talked to those people who stayed in the classroom with the chalkboard, I honestly, I can't think of a single exception. I think all of them have said to me pretty much in those words that they envy me, that they wish they'd had those experiences. Instead of taking the path they did, or in addition to taking the path they did. So look, I think that's it for this video. He says, I also want to have a positive impact on the world in any way I can. I may not have all the right answers, but kid, at age 19, you're asking a lot of the right questions.